we're going to get started. There were a few questions in the chat that I will address right now. First of all, my name is Randy Gutenberg, Superintendent for Waunakee Community School District, and I really appreciate the great attendance that we have for our noon listening session. The way we're going to work today is I'm going to provide a little bit of information on the onset of our meeting that will provide some background information on a couple different topics, and then certainly we'll be opening it up for questions and comments for really the majority of the rest of our meeting. There were a few questions in the chat as far as how this is all going to work, so let me just kind of move us forward in the presentation. Our agenda is going to cover a number of different topics. First of all, I'm going to hit a few ground rules as we move forward with this webinar. I'm also want to discuss some of the recent events that our school district and community is working through with regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Also then touching on really a very pertinent issue for us as well, which is the COVID-19. So both 2 and 3 are pretty hefty topics in and of themselves, but I'm going to try to do my best to at least address part of both of them and then open it up for questions at the end. I'll also be talking a little bit of some things that are coming for the future, such as summer school, fall 2020, give some predictions and projections and let you know what we're working on, and then questions and comments and feedback towards the end. Some of the ground rules, just to help you understand, you're either attending as a panelist or as an attendee. The panelists I have entered right now are Steve Summers, our Executive Director of Operations, in case there's any questions that come up with regards to any of our operational functions or budget, and Tim Schell, our Director of Curriculum and Instruction. We also have a few members of our board who are present. I think Brian Heffer, Judy Engelbretson, Joan Ensign. Just trying to see if Mike was able to join us as well. And there may be a few others that are popping in. School board members that are present are here to listen, and if there's a question that they can be of assistance with, are also on the panelist side of this webinar. But there's going to be no action or any items taken up by the board, even if we have a quorum of them present. First of all, the way we'll address questions and interaction here is I'm going to wait till the end of my presentation, then I'll go through and start to address questions and comments that are there. There's a couple ways to do it. One is to raise your hand. I believe on your screen you should see a raise your hand button. That will let me know that you would have a question. There's also a question and answer tab. The Q&A one is probably the easiest one for me to manage. So if you're willing to type some of those pieces in, I'd be very happy as we get to that part of the presentation to address those. Otherwise, the raising your hand piece will let me know that you'd like to speak. And then if your Zoom link is updated, I'll be able to let you speak, and it'll let me know once I click on your name. If not, I'll just have to refer you to the Q&A section on the webinar. Just as a piece, just as I think people want to know that there may be some of our local media that are present on this call. So as I answer questions and talk about some of the different information, that just so you're aware that this may get reported on in a future article in the paper. The panelists that we have, primarily speaking for myself at least, I'm going to try to do my best to answer your questions, but I can guarantee you that I won't have specific answers to every question that is going to be out there. And I'll try to be as honest as I can with regards to what we know and what we don't know. But something I will guarantee you of is that anything that you share with us today will certainly be considered and will be very valuable feedback as we start to move forward. Moving on, I think this webinar was really established, first of all, as a response to needing to want to talk to the community as opposed to writing emails about COVID-19. But certainly over the last week, we've had a number of events that have happened in our community, in our surrounding states, and certainly in the nation. And those have all come forth with impacts on our community, impacts on our students. And I've heard from many people with regards to their perspectives on it, heard about how it's been impacting some of our students, and then just the whole conversation that's taking place in our world today around race, around equity, around inclusion. And I thought, I need to take some time today to acknowledge that, certainly to share that the Waunakee Community School District is committed to providing a safe place for people. And that is a piece that is found within our mission. It is found within our strategic work that we're doing. And anything that's occurring that creates a place that is not safe, that creates a environment where racism exists, are some things that we do not tolerate, condone, and are doing things to try to work to improve for all of our students. So I thought, as an educational institution, I think education plays a big role in all of those conversations. And I wanted to share with the community what are some of the things that we are doing. So the next few slides are going to show up as really bullet points of bodies of work. And certainly those are going to show up as, well, it looks like you're doing some things around this space. And I realized that the proof as far as the impact is what actually happens day to day. And I'm just going to state from the onset that we have continued work to do as a school district, as a community, and as a society, as far as how we're going to address diversity, equity, and inclusion in our daily lives. From a personal perspective, I think the place that was very meaningful to me was reading Zaretta Hammond's book, Culture, Responsive Teaching in the Brain. Our school administrative team read this a few years ago, and I think that really started to have us think differently about how we teach, how our kids learn, and the impacts of race and linguistically different students within our schools, and how we need to be thinking about how we meet the needs of all of our kids. From there, we've had a number of different pieces that have continued to move forward. We've become part of the Dane County Equity Consortium, which started off with the Dane County Superintendents of the school districts coming together and talking about some of our common needs. We're all having worked around diversity, equity, inclusion, and we have created a consortium to really start to put some collective efforts to it. We've created forums and opportunities for students because we feel student voice is a very important part in that process. We brought our school board together from around the region to engage and learn together. And then certainly from just a regional perspective of professional development for all of us. We've been attending the Minority Student Achievement Network Conference. Their national conference is held in Madison every year. So since 2014, we've been sending people and members of our staff to that conference. I've attended the last 3 years and find it to be probably one of the most valuable conversations that I've had really around equity, because we're talking to people from all around the country, and that has been really impactful for me. We've also worked with the National Equity Project and are continuing to see how we can become more ingrained in some of the work that they do. And then this year, we really put a focus towards our staff with our professional development. Percy Brown, who works in the Middleton School District, was our keynote speaker this fall, and then did some breakout sessions with our staff. Amanda Goodenough, who works in the UW system, was our keynote speaker this February, and also did some breakout sessions with our staff. And really just helping us to frame up about things like implicit bias, microaggressions, things that we need to be very much aware of in our practices, and how those impact our kids within our schools, and how we can continue to improve as an educational institution to be helping all of our kids grow, feel safe, and learn. Now, when we start to look at our students, I think that's a very important piece that we need to support. I mean, they're our clients. They're the folks that are in front of us every day. They're the ones whose experience matters in our school district. We have some student groups that are high school that have really started to impact also work in some of our other buildings. The Lasonia Doris group, our Justice League, and recently the addition of our Black Student Union. I think they all bring a great student voice that have really helped us, not only as a staff, as an administrative team, particularly the Lasonia Doris and the Justice League. They conducted a workshop with their school board a few years ago that I think was really a great impetus to starting to look at our policies, our practices, and really hearing the stories from our kids as far as how pieces of our system are impacting them. The Black Student Union is new to us this year. I was hoping to get in to meet with them until the COVID-19 situation came up. So that'll be a piece that's on my agenda once we can come back together. I think the pieces that I've heard from the community is certainly how are you addressing things like racial slurs, language, symbols like the Confederate flag, and any type of behaviors that aren't appropriate, particularly as they're geared towards our minority students. And those are pieces that we have continued to have conversations on. Confederate flag was certainly an issue for us at the high school at the beginning of this school year. Brian Borowski and his team took a very strong stance with regards to that. We can address issues that are causing a substantial disturbance, and from that lens, this created a disturbance at our school and in our learning environment. And kids who wore that symbol were asked to either change or to leave school for that day, and that was a big conversation as far as trying to educate our students about how do these things impact others within our learning environment, and how do we make sure that we create a safe space for all of them. We do have issues with kids using inappropriate language and racial language, and again, educating kids on where those things come from and why those are not appropriate and how they impact our students. Talking to Brian Borowski, our high school principal, we still have work to do in this area, and we will be putting forth some plans as far as how we can really put some additional focus on these areas with our students over the next year and into the future. With our staff, these are challenging issues to talk about, so trying to help understand how we can bring forth those conversations, how we can facilitate them with kids, and listening to our students, I think, is of high priority to us. Our school board has been very supportive of the work in this area. They've established an ad hoc committee on equity and inclusion. At our June 8th board meeting, there will be the establishment of that committee, and then forthcoming, really, the work plans for that committee to be advisory to the school board as far as our practices, our policies, and how we can improve and continue to put a focus on making our schools as inclusionary as we are able to. But the first thing I'm going to admit is, as much as that we have a number of things I can show you on a slide deck here, we have a lot more work to be done, and we will continue to move forward with that. I know that there's been some questions that have been posed to me with regards to curriculum. Tim Schell, our curriculum director, has been working with our staff as conversations about how we can start to become more diverse in some of our curricular deliveries. We've also started to look at when we are working with staff, looking at how do you identify and microaggressions, implicit bias, and how does that play a part in our work, and how can we kind of improve our lens in those areas of work as well. And then hiring practices, that was a question I received in an email this morning. Brian Gabarski, our HR director, is keenly aware that that is a priority that he has as far as trying to seek opportunities to bring faculty and staff into our buildings that represent all of our students. And so that's a piece that we will continue to work on and have many connections within our region to see how we can be successful with that. So this is a topic that could continue to go on for our webinar in and of itself, and is probably a piece that we need to do at a point in the future. But I just wanted to really acknowledge what's happening in our world, and also how we as a school district are really trying to be proactive so that we can create a space where these conversations can take place, where we can support kids and we can improve our practices. So I appreciate the opportunity to address that with you today. I'm going to switch gears here to another issue, which is really how do schools react to COVID-19? And when I go back to March 13th, that's when we started spring break. And I never envisioned that. I had a vision that we potentially could get closed down as a school district, but I never envisioned that it would stretch all the way through the rest of the school year, and then potentially impacting us into the summer and possibly into the fall. But that is the place that we have found ourselves, as we have a public health crisis. And just like businesses have been impacted, so have schools. So our instruction through learning at home began on March 30th, and we moved all of our instruction remote. The one piece I've shared with parents in some of my writings to you has been that this has never been a choice as far as what we think is best for all students. We have kids that have certainly thrived in this environment, and probably this gave them an experience to see a different way of learning. We have some students that I would say have maintained, and then we have a body of students who've really struggled. And when we look at kind of the issues around the safer at home orders from the state, and then the impacts on schools and kids and families and education all happening in a whole different place, it's things that have surfaced have been the issues related to the mental health of our students and families. We've had food insecurity issues that we tried to mitigate with providing some food to about 200 kids per day. And you look at the social isolation, and then kids with special needs and some of our students with disabilities, and how they're responding to the learning at home platform. And I have children in the school district. I see all of these things. I see the piece of not being able to interact with your friends. I have a student, one of my children has an IEP and some significant needs, and I see the impact as far as he's a very social kid, and to not be able to experience that part of school, and that part is a big part of her learning, has been very difficult. So I see all sides to our learning at home. And it certainly has not been something that as a school district we have felt that this is something that is good for all kids. It's really a response to the health crisis that we've been in, and our mitigating factors of trying to figure out how do we continue to deliver education, and how do we try to keep kids active in their learning, and support families and kids in their emotional learning as well. When it comes to like guidelines of what we're using for COVID-19, I would say there's four that are primary. One is the Center for Disease Control out of the federal level, and then Wisconsin Department of Health Services, Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, and then Public Health, Madison-Dane County. The piece that's been challenging with this is that we've had orders from the state, and then which gave us kind of statewide guidance. And then we had the Supreme Court order that came through that says that wasn't an appropriate means to go through that, but certainly was an area where it needed to be on a more of a local level, which is where you started to have guidance from health services, Department of Public Instruction, and then certainly, and probably the most important, is working with their local health department. At this point, I am waiting and anticipating from word that's been passed down to me is that there's going to be some continued guidelines coming from both DHS, DPI, and our local health department. So these are things that we're going to be monitoring and watching as we continue to move forward with all of our work. All right, so a few things. Right now we are in the midst of that first week in June. Parents should have received a communication from our schools about how we're going to be closing out the school year, particularly with regards to picking up materials, dropping things off at school, all of those processes that we're doing within the guidelines that our local health department has provided us. Graduation is probably the one piece that I know has caused a very heavy heart for me and many of our staff, is that's usually the culminating celebration for our students as they come to the end of their K-12 time together. And we just have not been able to, per the health crisis, been able to really recognize them in the way that we want to. We have a virtual graduation in the process of being planned, but that being launched here in the next few weeks. And then we're still holding out hope that there'll be some way that we can have, with some more lenient guidelines, some way that we can at least interact with our students, and tentatively looking at that around August 1st. But the guiding principle for us right now is that forward Dane plan. That's a piece that I shared out with all the parents with regards to what the reopening plans are in Wisconsin. And we moved into phase 1 on May 26th, and 14 days from that date, it'll be reviewed. And if the metrics are met, it'll move us into phase 2. The piece that causes a little bit of complication is when the Supreme Court took a look at the safer at home orders, The one thing that they kept in place was the closure of school facilities. So school facilities are closed for instruction and extracurriculars through June 30th. So even if we open up into phase 2 earlier than that, we are still bound by those rules from a state judicial standpoint. So phase 2, there are parameters that would allow for some reopening of our programs. That's a piece that I'll talk about in a few minutes as far as what we're trying to mitigate and work through with that with regards to anything this summer. We're also going to be looking at our reopening plans, which I'll talk about some of the pieces and the work that needs to go into that. Our school board will be meeting twice a month just to stay abreast and to address some of the issues that are in front of us. And probably the biggest thing I wanted to bring to your attention just with regards to kind of a state landscape, with there not being statewide rules around really how to address the COVID-19 pieces and reopening, it's really fallen on counties and the county health departments. So you could travel just a few miles outside of Dane County and hit another county, and their rules may be different. So those are things that when we look at schools that we may be dealing with some different guidelines as well. So just keep that in mind. Summer school is obviously the next thing after we close out this school year. That will begin on June 22nd. It will begin in a virtual format. Since we're closed per order until June 30th, our first session of summer school will remain virtual. So that'll take us through July 9th. If beginning on July 13th, which is the beginning of our second session of summer school, that we are in phase 2, which I fully anticipate we will be, we have to make some decisions as are we going to bring some of our students back? Are we going to be doing a combination of virtual, face-to-face? Those are pieces that Sheila Wired, who's our director for summer school, and I have been having conversations about. And we are bringing to our June 8th board meeting some options related to that. I think the piece that is coming to reality for me is trying to understand which programs we might be able to bring back, because I do not believe that it's probably prudent for us to just open the doors and bring everybody in summer school back face-to-face. There's a lot of things from a planning and a logistics standpoint I just don't think we're in a place, nor will we have the guidance that are going to provide the clarity for us to do that. But I think there's merit to looking at some very select programs and see how we can start to integrate students back into the school, do it safely, and then also learn from those experiences. Our fourth bullet point here I think is important. We have to look at what's realistic, and that'll be a piece that we'll be talking about with our school board as we bring some of these ideas forward and making sure that we can do those things and be safe for all. Transportation is going to be, when you think about all the things around schools and COVID, that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we have. The guidelines that we have out of our public health department is a school bus's capacity with social distancing is about 15 kids. So just thinking about the number of kids that we transport and looking at the scalability as far as how we would have to operate if we had that type of a number, that causes us some challenges. I am anticipating that there will be some clarification coming out of the Department of Public Instruction and Department of Health Services around transportation, but I'm not certain it's going to give us a great deal more latitude. So that's a piece we're going to be working on not only throughout the summer months, but also from a standpoint of when we go into the fall. Summer school, there was a survey that went out to get your input with regards to some different options. So as you took a look at some of those pieces, Sheila and staff did a nice job really trying to find some creative ways to offer some programs in a different format, and looking at feedback from staff and parents. This is some of the classes that were reopened or created, particularly as we are starting off in a virtual format. Just want to address for just a moment outside groups using our facilities. Right now, we are not allowing any of our outside groups to be used by our facilities until we get an opportunity to reintroduce our own students and our own programs to our buildings. I think there's protocols with regards to cleaning, sanitation, and just management of people that we need some time and experience with before we start opening them up for a plethora of other groups that use our facilities. We will be bringing back any updates with this to our school board, particularly as we start to move into the July months and particularly into the summer, with any updates with regards to outside groups using our schools. I want to take a few minutes to really kind of just introduce you to what are all the variables that are included in reopening schools. I mean, I wish nothing more than to be able to just operate as normal. We know how to do that. We know how to do that well. But creating a framework for reopening when you are still dealing with concerns around a pandemic and needing to follow guidelines that are coming out of different agencies has really caused some pieces that we need to dive into. We need to put some plans in place. We're going to need to have some conversations about, and to be honest, we're going to have to make some local decisions as far as of how we want to move forward. But just to talk to you a few minutes about, I've already mentioned transportation. That is going to be a continual issue for us as we kind of work through it. The number of kids that we can have on a bus safely, right now, the number is 15 per bus, unless that's not reasonable. Well, that just, it opens up kind of those conversations of, well, what is a reasonable number to do safely? There are supposed to be some additional guidelines coming out in the next week or so, and we'll compare those to our local health department and see how that helps to guide our decisions. And wellness checks, and really what do we do if a student or a child or a staff member becomes ill? And we all know that when kids come to school that there's all kinds of illnesses that go around, not just COVID-19. But that's going to be a piece we have to be more diligent about and be able to have plans to work through. I've had some parents ask me about face masks and PPE for students and staff. What I'm anticipating coming out as our guidance is some recommendations, but probably not any mandates. And we all know that there's going to be challenges with either one of those, and particularly when we look at students who are younger in age and also kids with different needs, where that just may not be possible. So we're going to have some real factual conversations and logistical and realistic conversations about what are we going to require and what are we going to recommend and what are some of the latitudes that we'll provide. That's an emerging piece. We're supposed to, again, receive some guidance on that issue in the coming week. The part I have underlined under instructional model is, along with transportation, is really the basis of what does instruction look like as we reorientate to school. Like I said, my preference would be to not have to deal with any of these health concerns and just open up our doors, but that's not seeming like our reality right now. So we are watching very carefully at what are the social distancing rules we're going to have to adhere to. How many kids can we bring into a classroom or into a school? And then our ability to meet those requirements. I mean, those could truly create situations where we have a very mixed model as far as instruction. And I realize that all of those guidelines have impacts not only on the school's planning, but on families. If we can bring everybody back, everybody's face to face with protocols, that's one thing. But if we have to be remote, we have to have some sort of an alternating schedule because we can't bring everybody into the building at the same time, or some level of a blending where some kids attend school on a certain day and the other days they're remote. Those are all certainly within the planning parameters of what are being released from the CDC and what I anticipate coming out as far as decision points and guidelines coming out of our state level. But those are all going to be driven by what size groups we can have together, how we can manage the social distancing pieces. When you start to look at what's the impact of all of those, it's significant. We know that there are kids that they need that social interaction. So from our perspective, trying to figure out how we can start to reintegrate kids together is an important piece. We also know we have to look at alternative models for some kids who, for many different reasons, may want to stay virtual. And it could certainly be that we have some that are high risk, and that includes our students and staff. The item I underlined at the bottom, I think, is just an important part that differentiates really opening up a school versus opening up, and not that opening up a small business is easy, but when you start to look at just the scale of people. So we have almost 5,000 people within our 6 buildings when we open up our doors at any one time. And you start to look at even our smaller schools that have 500 students in them, you still have 50, 60 staff members. So those are trying to manage that scale of people in a safe way under the guidelines is really what will be part of our challenge as far as how do we do that safely, and that will impact things like our instructional model, and it will have an impact as far as how we can and if we can provide transportation. So those are the things that we are starting to put some work around, and I wish I had specific answers to all of those. They are all generally a work in progress and pieces that I'm continually having updates from our state and local agencies on. As any business that's reopening under the Forward Dane plan, there's 4 things you need to have. You need to have policies and procedures for hygiene, cleaning, protective measures, and then staff training. We fall into that same realm as well. Some things that I feel are very important for us are communication, and that's part of the reason for this webinar here today. Our school board is committed to meeting twice a month over the next few months, particularly until we can get through some of the big decisions that we have to make. I'm going to be looking at continued feedback loops that we can have with our community and our parents as we start to walk through these, so that you have ample notice of the things that we are thinking about and looking for some feedback as far as how we can service you the best to our ability. The one thing I've learned over the last number of months has been take it one step at a time. And that is a piece that we are going to continue to look at. We are looking at this week, closing down schools, looking at our options for summer, and then also then starting to put a deep dive into what the future can look like in the fall. And with that, I'm going to stop the sharing of my screen so I can more accurately get to some of your questions. And I see that my chat line has quite a few items in it. So if you'll just give me a moment, I will jump to there. And I'm sure there's, yeah, the question I have is will this be on YouTube? Yes, this is being live streamed right now to YouTube, and then after it's complete, and after tonight's webinar is complete, these will all be posted there. Problems with the audio, I'm sorry, I'm probably not able to help you with that right now. All right. Yeah, is the district considering starting the school year in August and taking a longer break over Thanksgiving, the end of December, when viruses always peak? At this point, we're not considering that. One of the things that we are working on is trying to prepare our staff for really a learning environment and a flexible learning environment next year, not exactly knowing what that's going to look like. So we are bringing our staff back earlier in August to work through some of those pieces. I've worked with our staff committee on some of those items, but we're not right now looking at really changing up the calendar to that extent, as far as moving things around as far as when kids attend. Yeah, the survey piece around this question is considering a survey of parents around busing, and if some parents would be willing to transport their kids and neighbors. That is definitely a thing that we are having conversations about and seeing how we can mitigate those issues. I think that's a great suggestion. We also have to look at what are the parameters that we have to provide per state law. And I know that transportation is one of those areas that they're looking to give us some latitude around, so that we're able to potentially have a waiver around some of the requirements that we have to fall into. But I think that's a great suggestion about a survey and seeing how we can help to get some of our numbers down if parents are able and willing to transport their children. I think that's a great suggestion. Position development. Question is related to the question, parents might be better positioned to volunteer to do more virtual learning, keep their kids home so that other families can access in-person resources. Yeah, I think that that is definitely some of the conversations that we're going to need to continue to have is kind of what optional delivery models do we have? I know that there are some, I've had a few families reach out to me and say that this has been a positive experience and they'd like to experience more of the virtual learning. So we're going to have to think about how we are able to accommodate that moving into the future. Certainly some families are choosing because of health reasons of why, particularly with some of our fragile students, about if they can send their child to school. Has the district touched on what will happen if there's a positive case in a class family, or what level of spread the school warrants the closure for some time period? Yeah, excellent question. That's a discussion right now. We're looking for some guidance from Dane County Public Health. I have weekly meetings with them, and then we have a separate one with all the Dane County superintendents and a representative from Public Health. And that is absolutely a piece that we are looking for some continued guidance on, and they are going to help us provide that. You know, one of the things that Public Health has the power to do is open and close schools around these type of issues. So their guidance as far as what we can and should be able to do will be critical to that. We're also expecting some protocols coming out from the Department of Public Instruction this week with regards to protocols for what our nurses are going to be able to do and what they're going to have to do with if a student gets ill, what are some of the parameters we have to deal with in school, how long would a student be out, and then the mitigating factors of kind of the community spread and contact tracing. So those are some things that we are looking, we still need some guidance on, but it's definitely on our radar. Please make sure you consider the rigor that students will have when looking at remote learning. I honestly feel that the last 2 months have focused on keeping their brains working, but not really learning anything new. Kids are getting bored. Yeah, that's that is absolutely a piece that we've had conversations with regards is how far do you continue to press forward with kids that are ready to do so, and also looking at it from a lens of we know we also have a number of families and parents that haven't been able to provide the support at home to help their kids move forward. So it's been really a difficult balancing act as far as how far and how much can we do without creating a great divide and a great inequity of our families of who can provide the greatest level of support and those that are struggling, and trying to then navigate that with some technology challenges, internet connectivity challenges, and availability of adults to help. Question is, while I understand that there are mandates and recommendations forthcoming at a district level, is there any consideration for reaching out to daycares statewide that have remained open during this time and what they've done to maintain a healthy atmosphere? The guidelines for daycares are always different than the guidelines for schools since the shutdown started, even when it came to dealing with positive cases. Yeah, excellent question. One of the guidelines we received out of the Department of Public Instruction has been the daycare guidelines. Public Health, Madison-Dane County has also provided those to us. And they said that that could at least be a kind of a foreshadow of some things that we might be faced in dealing with. I think the challenge that we have with that's a little bit different than the daycares is just the scalability of how many kids. So I think right now they can have 15 kids in a classroom and potentially like 100 in their total students present. And when you start to even look at like Prairie Elementary School, where one of my daughters attends, is you have 600 kids and X number of classrooms. That's the piece that we have to figure out is how can we safely bring not only 15 kids to a classroom, but then multiple classrooms with being able to address that. So the daycare guidelines have been informative, and we will continue to look at those. And I think that that's a good suggestion to see what we can learn from that space. And Public Health has been very willing to share some of their experiences from that as well. When does the school plan to make a final decision so parents can start to plan? Other local schools have already decided on the fall plans. Well, with regards to other local school districts, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what they've released at this point. I'm in very close contact with my colleagues in the other districts. I think most districts are really looking at a decision by the end of July. And that's really where I would see if I'm kind of projecting out when we have to have a final decision as far as what all of this is going to look like and how we are going to mitigate all the issues that you brought up here, but at least to my knowledge, there aren't any local school districts specifically around the Dane County area that have made a solid decision about fall. We're all in a very similar situation as far as trying to finalize what some of these guidelines are so we can make decisions. But I think you'll start to see in that July timeframe us needing to start making decisions, because not only do we want to get that to you as parents, but we need plenty of time this summer to be really diving in so that we're ready for whatever situation we find ourselves into. With some kids not having a great first semester but had an awesome second semester, which would have improved GPAs dramatically, why wasn't the option for pass-fail grades an option? They would get to choose. Yeah, this is really with regards to the pass-fail grading. I think our primary reason for that was, again, trying to look at this from a lens of equity as far as the amount of support that kids were receiving. And certainly when you start to look at just wanting to create one system that we were able to implement, so that we needed to be able to look at it logistically internally as far as our ability to manage it, our teachers able to manage it, and then also our something that was consistent with our students. We worked very closely with trying to learn from the colleges as far as how they were going to view this, particularly as we had our juniors and seniors that are impacted. So our decision with regards to pass-fail was, and staying with one standard, was for consistency, and also wanting to really address some of the different needs that we had with family situations and kids and support. Some things that will obviously, going into the fall, that'll be a conversation we have to continue to have as far as how we assess and grade it. Probably can't be the same dialogue that we're having here today. Have you discussed possible staggering assigned or pickup and drop-off times to avoid too many kids out at a time? We have. I think the issue that we're running in with, like a transportation piece, if you just kind of think about it from a busing perspective, is just our general routes every year are about $1 million expenditure. So if we had to run multiple routes or additional routes to pick up kids, we're concerned about the impact financially and our ability to really afford that. But looking at, I think that we're going to have everything on the table as far as how we could, once we have more clear guidelines on what we can do, I think having all of the items on the table as far as how we can address mitigating factors of keeping kids congregated is something we're going to have to take a look at. If virtual continues to be needed for the fall, will there be improvements, changes to the format? What face-to-face visual interactions with teachers, etc.? My hope is that we're going to be able to have some level of face-to-face in the fall. I'm reluctant to believe that it'll be just everybody is back as normal. But part of what we are doing is needing to create some space this summer, and particularly in August, for our staff to really start to look at their delivery of curriculum. I think it needs to evolve and continue to improve over where we were this year. I see this as really a crisis planning piece. We knew probably in the end of February, beginning of March, that there was potential we could be closed for a period of time. I mean, at that time, I think we were thinking for a few weeks. When we realized that we were going to be closed for a longer duration, we put very concerted efforts starting just before spring break, and then particularly once we returned from break with our staff to give them an opportunity to plan for the spring. But we learned a number of things this spring through that interaction, and so our intent would be that if we had to be in a virtual format in any format next fall, that we can continue to look at how we can improve that. Who decides if school opens in person or not, Waunakee or Dane County? Probably a little bit of both. Dane County Public Health, Department of Health Services at the state level has the ability to open or close school. They will be giving us guidelines on really the practices that they recommend for safe opening. And then we have to utilize those to the best of our judgment to keep kids safe. The piece that weighs heavily on my mind is a big responsibility of us as a district is safety of kids. And looking at the the risks involved. I'm not a healthcare professional, but I'm trying to utilize the guidelines that we're given. We're going to do everything we can to try to bring our students back in the fall under the parameters that we're allowed. We feel that's good for them educationally, social, emotionally, interacting with their friends. But we're definitely going to have to be weighing on our other government partners who can give us guidance on how to do that safely. If a parent chooses to enroll their student in one of the private online schools that are well established, if even just for 6 to 12 months, will the Waunakee Community School District work with parents to transfer these credits back? I think there's two parts to that. Certainly we'll work with you on credits. Second of all, we do offer some, one of the things we have to think about is how are we going to mitigate some parents who may want to stay virtual, and that will have to be part of our planning. Particularly if you're at the secondary level, many of the independent or many of the charter schools that are virtual, we offer similar programs here, just not under a charter format. So I'd recommend you reach out to us and let us know what you're thinking and see if we can accommodate. What are your plans for after-school co-curricular activities? This will be one that's going to be driven by really by the Department of Health Services. And you start to even look at like sports for the fall. It's hard to imagine how all of those pieces come together, that even as you move through the forward game plan into the later stages, stage 3, there's still social distancing issues. So I think we're going to have to work with health services to see which programs are going to be the best to be able to bring back and under what parameters can we do that. Some of our contact sports may be a little bit more difficult than some of ours that are more solitary like golf. But that's a to be determined question, and one that I know Erin May is very interested in getting an answer to that as well, particularly as our traditional co-curricular activities start at the very beginning of August. Will our students be tested next year to see where they will stand academically? How will we assure that they will not be held behind in their education? That's a piece that Tim Schell, our curriculum and instruction director, and I have had some conversations about. I mean, there's different trains of thought, but one of the pieces is that keeping kids active this spring, that they do have an elastic kind of learning opportunity, and our curriculum has enough of the spiraling pieces to it. We feel that we definitely have to be monitoring any of our assessments and looking for areas where we may have any areas that we need to put some more emphasis. But I think it's also prudent that you don't want to back up your curriculum. So now that you're trying to catch everything up from this spring in the effort, because then in essence, you kind of move the whole curriculum backwards. So we'll be kind of looking at how can we hit those essential pieces of our curriculum to continue to move ourselves forward. But definitely that's a piece that's on our radar as well and will be considered. Have you considered a survey to families to inquire if folks have specialized training to help support learning? That's one we haven't considered, but thank you for that input. I'll make sure that we take note of that as far as trying to see how families could be, family backgrounds might be able to assist. Well, teachers have training on teaching online this year. There was very little interaction with the teachers having true interactions with kids. Two reasons for that. I mean, part of it was trying to, again, address different needs of families. We had some families that had limited internet access and one computer and multiple kids. We had family situations where we had mom and dad were still working and the older children were in charge of the younger children. So having everything that was synced up live for interaction just wasn't necessarily possible. We felt that that was an important piece to include, but also having instruction that was taking place where they could do it kind of as they had time and space to do it within their household was an important piece for us. But yes, that is the online teaching piece is part of why we need to create some more space at the beginning of next school year for our staff to continue to look at how we can improve upon where we were this year. Seems like a lot of focus has been on reopening. Seems like it can't be visible, like that can't be a viable option anytime soon. I understand that there are concerns around creating learning gaps. I don't understand why similar practices can't be applied virtually. the amount of effort put into lessons that are experienced seems to be minimal. For my kindergartner, only 15 minutes, Google Hangout, etc. Number of things is trying to look at, and I've heard from a lot of parents about screen time, and I share that as a parent myself as far as the amount of time my kids have been and needed to interact in front of a screen. Also looking at how much time do we want our learners and our kids, particularly at different levels, instructionally, and what they can handle as far as support. So that has been different for every child from 4K to kindergarten all the way up through our 12th graders. You're right, there has been a lot of focus on trying to figure out how we can get kids back. That's going to be a piece that I think is going to have a lot of parental reflection as far as what you feel is going to be the best place for your kids. I feel like there is definitely a desire, and I'm speaking kind of statewide, community-wide, to do everything that schools can do to try to bring kids back safely to the extent that we're able. Partially because as we get to September, I'm anticipating more and more businesses are going to be opening as well, and parents will be needing to work. So I think we're trying to navigate the safety piece along with the guidelines that were provided, and also realizing that, and it's part of why we're having this conversation here today, is giving you a heads up that there's going to be potential shifting of models, and we'll absolutely keep you informed as we go through the summer. Will Waunakee make its own independent decision about returning to school or based on other districts in Dane County? I work very closely with all of our other Dane County superintendents. So we have a good network to kind of learn from each other and share information with each other. I think our primary guide, and speaking kind of for collective group from our Dane County area, is really working closely with our public health department, and then certainly some pieces that we have to decide what's going to be best for our community. But I think that'll be part of the conversation I'll be having with our school board, are some guiding principles as far as reopening, and some of those will be around kind of where do we take our guidance from. Appreciate the kind comments that came through as well. I have a child in Waunakee 4K going into kindergarten. In normal circumstances, we want to send them to kindergarten. However, depending on what the school format looks like in the fall, we may feel the best option for our family is homeschooling them in kindergarten. When researching through DPI, it seems that the current Wisconsin law says that to attend first grade at the public school, a child needs to attend kindergarten. Will the Waunakee Community Schools maintain that or allow more flexibility? And we have families that come out of homeschooling on an annual basis, and then we just have processes for reentry for them. So certainly, if that was a choice that you made, I think that if you connected with them, you can connect through me, and I'll put you in contact with our student services and our curriculum department, and they can work through what that option would look like for you. Usually, I believe we have some sort of like a reentry assessment to just make sure that they're ready for their reentry to the grade level, and then having some conversations on what their experience is. COVID-19 has proven adverse impacts on communities of color. What combined with the recent racial events is a concern. Agreed. How can we wrap our arms around our parents and kids of color, both now and long term? I mean, it says I don't have to answer it live. I think that's one we just have. I mean, I was asked by a number of people, what can we do? And this was early on in the COVID situation. I think the best thing we can do is be good neighbors to each other. We have to look out for each other. We have to find out when you start the conversations about transportation in the fall and looking at how we can support our neighborhood kids. I think that's things that are just the right thing to be doing, and having some of the conversations as we're able to do it. And I think that addresses at least part of that. And then certainly support for some of the conversations that are certainly sparked by the dialogue that's happening right now around race and equity and inclusion. When will decisions be made regarding extracurricular activities and sports? My guess is that we'll probably start to get some additional information as we get into the additional phases of the Forward Dane plan. And so once we move into phase 2, they will provide additional guidance to us on types of activities, including sports. So I'm hoping that we may have be able to have some input into that probably by the end of June, July. Um, as you consider plans for reopening, is it possible to arrange Q&A sessions with parents and students and teachers? This can be helpful as teachers approach their instruction differently. Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. We're going to need to continue to do formats like this or in some other format to really have a dialogue. This is really helpful to hear the questions that are on your mind and to be able to provide feedback to you, whether it's the right answer that you want to hear or just the truthful answer of where we sit. I think that's an important dialogue, but I like your suggestion about how we can kind of bring all of us together. Including parents in the planning process, yes. I think right now we're just trying to get a framework of what we're trying to plan for. The biggest challenge I have found in this whole process has been the rapidity of which everything changes. So I think that there will be opportunities for us to figure out how we can include parents once we kind of have a little bit more guidance and start to put our structures in place. I mean, we're definitely looking at kind of our leadership structure district-wide and at buildings, and I anticipate there'll be opportunities where we can include parents. Has there been any discussion about going virtual for high school students and prioritizing in-person instruction for elementary? Yeah, that's definitely one of the models that's out there, is trying to kind of use your space differently, where you can spread out more of your elementary kids and have them face to face, and then older kids having an opportunity to be more virtual. And that's one of the models out there, but we haven't dove that deep into those, depending on as far as like what our model will actually be. That's still on our forthcoming planning process. When school does open, I predict you're going to need a lot of parent and community volunteers to help kiddos catch up. Plan ahead. Thank you. That's a good suggestion. I mean, the other part is, and this is part of the reopening plans, is some of the initial plans you see out there. We rely very heavily on volunteers in our district, but some of the opening plans that I'm seeing out there and some of the guidelines are trying to then mitigate the number of adults in schools. So we have to rectify that locally. Younger kids need face-to-face with their teacher. Have you considered split scheduling where students can go face-to-face for less hours a day to get core instruction? Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the models that we have to start to think about. So when I think of alternative instructional models, some of the things that you're referencing there are pieces that we have to consider. What options for renting alternate locations for gathering students? That's one I haven't thought about, but that's an option. I'll just take a note of that. I don't know what opportunities we would have with regards to that, or how much that would leverage us given just the scale of our size, but certainly something to consider. Could getting ready for kindergarten be offered at elementary level, access similar to online, other elementary students? One of the things that we're trying to look at is if we were able to do something in summer school, camp kindergarten, that whole premise is around getting kids into a building. So that will be a conversation we'll have with our school board in the coming week, as far as if we're open to bringing kids back and select programs, is that one to consider, mainly because it's really about getting used to a building in some of those formats. We offer parents the option to stick to the virtual format in the fall. It'd be helpful to have the school give us some take-home materials, manipulatives. Absolutely. Our biggest challenge this year was, when did spring break fall? If some other districts that were on spring break or were in session when we were on spring break were able to get more materials home, we obviously haven't been able to do that till this week. So I think that if that were the case, we would certainly be looking at how we could do some of those things. Potentially with some of our virtual learning this summer school, we're going to look at kind of the concept of take-home kits that might be able to be of assistance. Is there consideration of different guidelines based on grade level? I think that's something we need to consider, as far as how does this look similarly or differently across all of our schools. So that will be a piece that definitely we'll have to consider. Will there be a mandated temperatures taken on each student at the door? Temperature piece has been kind of a big conversation for us, and I'm talking more at the kind of the regional level versus local. There's a percentage of individuals that are asymptomatic, so that's not going to catch it. we also realize that there's ways to, I'm not trying to say manipulate a temperature, but if kids are sick, it's customary that we as parents medicate our kids with Tylenol, etc. So it's not a catch-all piece for us. One of the things we have to look at is how are we going to monitor health? And there's probably a lot of professional development for our staff just to be able to be more diligent of seeing when kids aren't feeling well and then having a plan for how we deal with that. All right, I'm going to jump over to my Q&A side here. Do you have a comprehensive plan roadmap to address equity, diversity, and inclusion for parents to read? Does that plan include the integration of diversity and inclusion into the curriculum? Great question. The first piece that I would say with regards to our equity of opportunities for all students is on our strategic plan. It's a piece that I think our first foray into that work was really needing to build a background and a format with our staff to bring them up to speed on really a lot of the issues that we face around equity and inclusion. And hearing from our students, bringing in the speakers that we did. What I see as kind of our next piece that we need to start looking at is, and that's some of this work will also scaffold out of the ad hoc committee that our school board has put together, is trying to really now put some more definition to a more comprehensive plan or roadmap as you referred to. So at this point, that's not in writing. It's more of a piece that we have as a guidepost that we feel we needed to kind of build that foundation with our students and our staff, and now being able to really start to put some more specifics together. But curriculum is one of the items that I know our curriculum team is looking at. How will the school district monitor the emotional health and well-being of students and staff? This relates to in-person and virtual instruction. Our student services staff have done their best to try to get referrals, and they've worked they've had a lot of referrals over the course of this time together, and reaching out with our social workers, our psychs, our counselors. That will continue. We've also done screeners in the past, which we'll continue to do, with just trying to monitor where our students are from a social and emotional lens. And we're also looking at, that is one of our strategic initiatives as well, is how do we do a better job with having more of a universal instruction around social emotional learning, and then helping to identify kids and then having strategies to address that. So definitely a piece that is on our radar as a high need. What do you recognize as minorities needing recognition? If a minority does not have a significant number, how are they to be included? How do you recognize as a minority needing recognition? If a minority does not have a significant number, how are they to be included? I think part of what we need to look at, and I'm going to answer this in more of a general sense, is we just need to be looking more globally as far as the backgrounds, experience, and lives of our kids. I think that when I take a look at how we can do a better job with equity and inclusion, some of it's just making sure that we are having those strong relationships with our students, understanding kind of their experiences in life, and making sure that we can be a positive impact to improve it. So there's certainly pieces that if there's a representative population that is very much not prevalent in our community, we need to just be aware through really those relationships with the kids to learn how we can help to support them. It's kind of a hard question to answer in this format, but that's where I believe relationships with kids is kind of the key to a lot of the work that we do. Will there be shifts in expectations from teacher staff regarding learning levels for students? Yeah, I think we're going to continue to have to evolve in our instruction as we go into the fall, and it's a piece of why we need to create some more space for our teachers to have those conversations and collectively work and put their plans together for the fall, depending on what method we're going to be at. If we were to return to virtual instruction in the fall, would that continue throughout the entire school year? Would the district continue to work towards returning to in-person instruction and continually monitor when? my hope is that if we have to start off the year in any sort of a blended model or virtual or alternative schedule, that at the point when we can return to face-to-face, that we do so. That's our most effective way for us to interact and support our kids. So I think we're going to have a model that's flexible, that can flex from potentially virtual, a blended model, and then face-to-face. So my hope is that throughout the next school year that we're not sitting here in a year in the same place we are today, and that we're able to celebrate our kids and have more of a normal end to our school year. So that's at least my hope and my vision. All right, I think that gets to the end of all of my questions. I think there was one more here. Local businesses are extremely supportive of Waunakee High School. High school students and staff are open to adjusting to unique environments. There are partners that would be very open to high school sessions being held off-site. That's good. That's good feedback. Thank you. And I appreciate all of the attendees today. It looks like we have about 150 people who have been in attendance. I hope this was helpful. Just trying to be as honest as I can about the answers that you have, and the ones that we don't have clarity on today, we will certainly be working to try to add some clarity in the future. So with that, I think I've hit the end of my Q&A and any of the other pieces that are here. Yeah, I think the last question I had here was just with regards to will we be leveling up instruction for the fall? I think we're going to be looking at what we learned from this year and how we can improve upon it. So great. Well, with that, everybody, I appreciate your time today. I hope this was helpful. And I'm going to end our webinar. And tonight I have a repeat of this where I'll be sharing the same information in my slide deck and then opening it up for a dialogue and question period as well. So thank you for all of your support. It's certainly been an adventure the last few months. We certainly could not do that without all of the parents of supporting our kids. So thank you very much for your time today and for all of your input.